Are you really judging a man by a faded patch? The flag rope clicked in the cold morning light outside the lakeside cafe, as quiet voices inside mocked him again. Soft, pressed laughter drifting just far enough to sting. But when he brushed that old navy patch, the room shifted. Even the silence felt like a heartbeat, remembering where it once stood. Quiet men leave echoes too, and still, if you listen close, that little patch can take you back. Sam Whitaker stepped into the lakeside cafe just after the breakfast rush, the bell above the door giving its familiar tired ring. The warm scent of coffee drifted out to meet him, but it couldn't soften the way every head in the corner booth tilted when they saw him. The old navy patch on the sleeve of his denim jacket caught the morning light. Rough-edged, faded, and older than most of the folks laughing at it. "Look there," one of the men murmured. "That old patch shows up again, heh." They laughed again at that same old navy patch, another said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Same joke every Veterans Week," someone added, tapping his spoon against a mug. Sam heard it. Of course he did, he always did, but he simply offered the waitress a grateful nod as she poured him a cup. His hands were steady, practiced in the art of pretending he hadn't heard a thing. Even so, a soft breath left him, the kind a man lets go only when he's learned there's no point pushing back against small-town habits. The windows rattled slightly with the lake breeze, and outside a gull cried in that lonely way they sometimes do. Inside, forks scraped plates and conversations rolled on, but one pair of eyes watched him differently. Lily Harper, all of 11 years old, and small enough for her feet not to touch the cafe floor, looked at Sam with a quiet sort of alarm. She'd heard those men laugh before, though she'd never known why they kept doing it. Her gaze drifted to the patch, dark blue, once now dulled to the color of an old photo left too long in the sun, and then back to Sam's face. Something in his eyes seemed older than the rest of him, like he was carrying a weight others couldn't see. "Morning, Sam," the waitress said softly, setting a warm plate on the counter. "Cold out there, chillier than I expected," he replied, keeping his voice low and even. A man at the booth said, "Maybe that patch of his is good luck. Shows up every year right on schedule." Another chuckled. "Must be glued on by now." Sam didn't turn toward them. He lifted his fork, taking a slow bite as if the noise behind him were nothing more than the rumble of a passing truck. Inside, though, something tightened. He ran a thumb over the patch without thinking the gesture small and almost hidden, as though he were checking to see if it was still there or still worth wearing. Lily slid out of her seat and wandered toward the counter, pretending to look at the pastry display. She stayed close enough to glance up at him. "Hi, Mr. Sam," she said gently. He gave her a warm smile. "Morning, Lily." She hesitated, then asked, "Does that patch mean something special?" Sam paused the question, catching him a little off guard. "It did," he said quietly. "Still does to me." Lily nodded like she understood something, even if she didn't. And for just a moment, the room's noise seemed to slip away. Then the bell above the door jingled again, and the breeze stirred the edges of Sam's jacket. The men at the booth leaned in, one of them, letting out another short laugh, not cruel, just careless. Still, he'd heard the same lines for years. Marvin Kellard posted the notice just after sunrise, pinning it to the community board outside the lakeside post office, where everyone in town eventually stopped by. The paper fluttered in the cool morning wind, bold black letters catching the light. Any military insignia must be verified for authenticity. He stepped back, crossed his arms, and nodded to himself as though he'd done something responsible. Folks walking past paused, squinted at the notice, then looked toward the street as if expecting to see Sam and his old patch any minute. "Same thing he did last year," someone murmured. "Guess we're doing this again." By mid-morning, whispers circled around town like leaves pushed by the lakeside breeze. He brings that old patch every year. Wants attention. He never shows any papers, does he? Funny how the stories never add up. No one spoke to Sam directly, but the shift in glances was enough to say it aloud. A few people nodded politely, yet their eyes lingered on his sleeve longer than usual. He felt it pressure without anyone raising a voice. He didn't stay in town long that morning. After finishing breakfast, he made his way to Mrs. Cole's house a few blocks past the church hall. Her mailbox leaned sideways as it had been for weeks, and Sam approached it with steady hands. He took a small toolkit from his truck and knelt down, tightening the old screws one by one until the box held firm again. Lily Harper spotted him from across the street as she walked her dog. She waved, bright and earnest as always, then crossed over when she noticed the faint scrape on Sam's arm and the edge of the familiar old patch on his jacket. "Morning, Mr. Sam," she said, fixing Mrs. Cole's mailbox again. "Just about done," he replied, standing to test the door of the box. It clicked shut gently. She said it kept dropping her letters. Lily watched as Sam reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thin, worn notebook. He flipped it open with practiced care and jotted something down in small, neat handwriting. "What are you writing?" Lily asked. He gave her a soft smile. "Just reminders. Folks I ought to check on, things I should follow up with, that sort of thing. You keep all that in the notebook. It helps me remember who needs a hand," he said. "And it keeps me humble, you know." Lily nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She looked at the notebook again, its pages weathered, corners softened by time. There was something almost sacred about the way he held it, as though the names and notes inside were part of his way of serving long after anyone stopped asking him to. A car rolled by slowly. Two men in the front seat glanced toward Sam, then toward the patch, then back to the road. Their voices carried just enough for Sam to hear. "Old patch again this year. Wonder if the HOA's gonna finally do something." Sam let his hand drop from the mailbox. He stood quietly, not giving the comments more weight than they deserved, but not shrugging them off either. The notebook went back into his pocket, hidden but not forgotten. Lily tugged lightly at her dog's leash. "People shouldn't talk like that," she said softly. "It's all right, Lily," Sam answered. "Folks talk. It's what they do, but it's not true." Sam didn't respond. He simply tightened the last screw on the mailbox, wiped the dust from his hands, and offered Lily a gentle nod before heading back toward his truck. The notice at the post office flapped harder in the rising wind, and conversations at the cafe grew sharper by noon. Something subtle shifted in the air, an uneasiness that hadn't been there yesterday, as though the whole town had agreed to the same assumption without ever saying it out loud. Then, a bigger misunderstanding began to build. The HOA meeting filled the community room long before the clock on the wall reached 6. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, people murmured in low voices, and the smell of old carpet mixed with the faint sweetness of powdered donuts someone had dropped on the back table. Sam sat near the end of the second row, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm tea. He didn't look at anyone in particular. He never did. His jacket rested lightly on his shoulders, the old navy patch worn thin at the edges. Marvin Kellard stepped to the front with a clipboard tucked under his arm, clearing his throat with the authority of someone who enjoyed moments like these. He tapped the microphone, though it didn't need tapping, and scanned the room until his gaze landed on Sam. "I checked the records," Marvin announced, voice swelling, like he was unveiling something important. "That patch of Sam's, it doesn't appear in any Navy documentation I could find." A ripple moved through the room, half curiosity, half satisfaction, as several heads turned toward Sam. Someone whispered, "Told you," and another person gave a small laugh, the kind that tried to sound harmless, but wasn't. Marvin continued, "Could be just a collector's item. Folks wear those sometimes." And well, like every year he brings that patch around again. His smile tightened. Again. A few people chuckled under their breath. Not loudly, but enough. Sam didn't raise his eyes. He kept both hands around the cup, holding it steady, as though he were bracing against a strong wind only he could feel. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, casting a pale glow across the room. Someone leaned forward in the row behind him to get a better look at the patch, squinting like they were examining a counterfeit bill. Near the back, Lily Harper stood on her toes to see past the crowd. When she realized what was happening, she slipped between the adults until she reached the center aisle. Her small voice rose above the murmurs. "He helps people," she said. "He helps every day." A few faces softened, but others turned skeptical, and one man near the front shook his head. "Sweetheart," he said kindly but dismissively. "You're too young to understand anything about Navy service." Lily's chin lifted stubbornly. "I understand kindness." Marvin adjusted his glasses. "This isn't about kindness, young lady. It's about facts." Sam finally looked up, not at Marvin, but at Lily. His eyes carried both gratitude and apology, like he wished she hadn't felt the need to stand up for him. He gave her the faintest nod, then lowered his gaze once more. The room grew quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that presses in on a person. Sam's fingers brushed lightly over the old Navy patch the way a man might check a cherished keepsake. The threadbare fabric caught the fluorescent light, its faded colors revealing years of sun work and memory worn into its fibers. He let his hand fall away, resting it again on the cup. A woman whispered if he had real service records he'd show them, and a man added, "Maybe he just likes the attention." Sam took a slow breath, letting it settle inside him. He didn't argue. He never did. Marvin wrapped up the agenda with a rehearsed closing, and chairs began to fold and snap shut. People filed out in clusters, still whispering, still glancing back at Sam, as if trying to confirm their suspicions. Lily lingered near the exit, watching him gather his jacket. She looked worried, as though she understood something the adults had missed entirely. Outside, the sky over the lake had turned the color of pewter, and a cold breeze drifted through the doorway as Sam stepped into the fading light. The chatter behind him faded, replaced by the soft creak of the flagpole ropes outside the building. Then, Veterans Day arrived, and with it someone the town had nearly forgotten. The Veterans Day ceremony drew more people than anyone expected. The community hall, usually quiet except for bake sales and choir rehearsals, filled with the soft shuffle of coats and the low hum of greetings. Flags lined the front rail, their edges stirring each time the doors opened to let in another rush of cold November air. Sam stood in the very last row, hands folded gently in front of him, the old Navy patch on his sleeve resting close to his heart. He kept to the back the way a man does when he's spent a lifetime avoiding the center of attention. He brushed the patch with his fingertips, absent-minded, careful, then lowered his hand again. The program began a choir of older voices, offering a slow, reverent hymn that drifted through the rafters. People bowed their heads, and Sam followed, blending into the background, as he always had. Up near the front, Marvin Kellard shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie with a nervous energy that didn't match the solemn occasion. The back doors creaked open. Someone whispered, "Is that Admiral Hargrove? He hasn't been back here since '03. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even the choir's final note seemed to hang longer in the air as a tall figure stepped into the hall. Admiral Daniel Hargrove, retired, respected, and unmistakably commanding. Even without a uniform, stood framed in the doorway. His hair had silvered since anyone last saw him, but his posture remained as straight as an unbent mast. He scanned the room. Not the front rows, Not the veterans seated near the podium. Not the HOA officials stiffening in their seats. His eyes found Sam. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Recognition traveled the distance between them like a quiet beam of light. Then the Admiral stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. Each footfall echoed across the wooden floor, drawing every gaze with it. Murmurs rippled outward, uncertainty mixing with curiosity, until the only sound left was the Admiral's steady approach. Sam's breath hitched, though he didn't lift his chin. He simply waited still, as stone as the older man drew near. At last, the Admiral stopped directly in front of him, close enough for Sam to feel the warmth of his presence. He straightened his back, set his shoulders, and without a word, stood silent before him. And just like that, the Admiral had returned and stood silent before him. The hall went utterly still. Marvin took an involuntary step back, his face draining of color. People who'd spent weeks doubting Sam now stared with a dawning sense of something they should have known all along. Lily, clutching Sam's old notebook to her chest, pushed her way forward until she reached Marvin. She pressed the notebook into his hands. "He helps the whole town," she whispered. "I wrote it all down." The Admiral glanced at the notebook, then at Sam. "He kept our generator alive through a whole storm night, back in '87. The Admiral said, his voice low but firm. "Saved every man on that vessel. I remember it clear as day." A soft gasp moved through the room. Sam bowed his head, the light from the hanging fixtures catching the faded fabric of his old Navy patch, making it glow almost like new. Yet, the town still had one more thing to do. Marvin Kellard found Sam the next morning by the lakeshore, where the old veteran liked to stand with his hands in his pockets and watch the mist lift off the water. The sun was still low, turning the waves a soft gold, and gulls cried overhead, as if announcing some overdue change in the air. Sam didn't turn when he heard footsteps approach. He simply waited, breathing in the quiet, until Marvin stopped beside him. Marvin began clearing his throat. I need to say something." Sam looked over, the expression calm but unreadable. Marvin's voice wavered. "I was wrong. For years, not just last week. I judged you too fast. I shouldn't have made you prove anything. I'm sorry." The words hung there, surprising even Marvin himself. His shoulders sagged with the weight he'd been carrying around without noticing. Sam offered a small, tired smile. "Everyone has days when they're in a hurry," he said gently. "I don't hold it against you." "But I do," Marvin whispered almost to himself. "I should have known better." Sam looked back toward the lake, the wind lightly brushing through his hair. "We move forward, Marvin. That's what matters." Later that afternoon, the HOA gathered for an impromptu session at the community office. The room felt different this time, quieter, more thoughtful. Lily sat in the back, clutching Sam's notebook, as if it were a small shield, and a few neighbors who'd once whispered doubts now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marvin stood in front of them, clearing his throat again, though now out of humility rather than authority. "I'd like to propose something," he said. "A recognition, something overdue. We vote to place a framed replica of Sam Whitaker's Navy patch in the lakeside cafe where folks gather every morning. A reminder of, well, of quiet service. Year after year." No one objected. Several nodded at once. A few murmured about time. The motion passed faster than any meeting in recent memory. By evening, the cafe lights were warm and glowing, reflecting on the windows like lanterns guiding townsfolk home. The owner, Miss Clara, wiped down the counter and hummed a tune as Marvin carefully hung the frame near the front, right above the coffee pots. Inside the frame, the replica patch rested against a navy blue backing cloth, its edges crisp its colors true to what Sam's had once been. Beneath it, on a small brass plaque, were the words, "For quiet service year after year." Sam stepped inside just as Marvin tightened the last screw. The whole cafe seemed to pause. People at their tables looked up, some offering uncertain smiles, others nodding in quiet respect. Miss Clara came forward with a steaming cup. "This patch," she said, tapping the corner of the frame with a grin, "gets free refills for life." A ripple of laughter passed around the room, warmer this time, without the sting of mockery. Sam shook his head, trying not to smile, but failing just a little. "You all didn't have to do this," he murmured. "We did," Marvin replied. "We should have done it long ago." Lily hurried up beside Sam, standing proudly, as though she'd played a much larger role than anyone realized. "It looks perfect," she said, beaming at the plaque. Sam gazed at the framed patch for a long moment. The memory of the old fabric on his sleeve, faded, weathered, misunderstood for so many years, now echoed in the bright new replica on the wall. It felt like seeing the past lifted and honored instead of dismissed. People resumed talking, but the tone had changed, calmer, kinder, lighter. A small group gathered around Sam, thanking him quietly, shaking his hand, telling him they never knew half of what he'd done. He only nodded and replied with the same gentle humility he had always carried. Eventually, as the evening thinned out and folks began heading home, Sam stepped back outside. The sky over the lake had deepened into a soft blue stars, beginning to blink awake one by one. The lights from the cafe glowed behind him, casting a warm reflection on the sidewalk. Still, one more echo remained. The lakeside cafe glowed like a lantern against the early evening, its windows soft with the shimmer of warm light. Inside, neighbors gathered in a gentle hush, their voices low, respectful, touched by something they couldn't quite name but felt all the same. The framed navy patch hung near the counter, catching the gold of the overhead lamps. It seemed to breathe a quiet life into the room. A small wooden podium had been pulled forward for the occasion, and Lily Harper stood behind it, her hands gripping the sides with a mix of nerves and determination. She looked out at the crowd, then over at Sam standing in the back, his posture modest as always, his hands lightly folded. When she spoke, her voice carried farther than her size suggested. "There are people," she began, "who serve without ever asking anyone to know their name." The cafe fell still. Even the hum of the old refrigerator seemed to quiet itself. "People who fix things before we notice they're broken," Lily continued. "People who help us when no one is looking. People who give and never expect anything back." Sam lowered his eyes, not wanting to draw attention, but the words settled on him like a warm coat. He let one hand drift to the old navy patch on his sleeve, touching it the way someone might touch a memory. The fabric didn't feel lonely tonight. It didn't feel old or questioned or doubted. It simply felt seen. Near the doorway, Admiral Hargrove stood with his hands behind his back. Though he wasn't in uniform, his presence carried that familiar, quiet authority. When Lily finished reading, the Admiral dipped his head slowly, deliberately, as though offering Sam a private salute, an echo of the reverence he had shown during the ceremony. He held the gesture for a moment, before lifting his eyes again. People began clapping soft, at first, then fuller, warmer. Sam blinked, taken off guard. He hadn't expected applause. He hadn't expected a gathering at all. For years, he'd tried to slip through town like a shadow, helping where he could, hoping no one made a fuss. Now the fuss was made not to spotlight him, but to honor something far deeper than recognition. Lily stepped down from the podium and walked straight to Sam. She tugged gently at his sleeve until he leaned a little closer. "You know," she whispered, her smile bright with certainty, "nobody laughs at that navy patch anymore." Sam felt his throat tighten, not painfully, just enough to remind him that gratitude can be as humbling as loneliness. He managed a small smile. "Thank you, Lily." She nodded once, proud and satisfied, then hurried back toward the front where the townsfolk were admiring the framed replica on the wall. Sam slipped toward the door, easing it open. The evening air drifted in cool and carrying the scent of pine from across the lake. Outside, the sun had fallen low, brushing the water, with long strokes of orange and rose. He stepped onto the porch, letting the door close softly behind him. From where he stood, he could see the framed patch through the cafe window. The light fell across it, in a warm band, making the brass plaque gleam gently. For a moment, the reflection of the lake danced over the glass, turning the patch into something both past and present. Something Carried honored, remembered. Sam breathed slowly, a peaceful breath, the kind a man takes when he realizes he's no longer walking alone. Behind him, the quiet murmur of the gathering continued, but it no longer felt like a world he stood outside of. It felt at last like home. He put his hands in his pockets, looked out toward the water, and let the breeze wash over him. If this story moved, you share it forward. After the small tribute faded into gentle chatter, Sam stepped out onto the cafe porch, the evening stretching wide and calm around him. The framed navy patch inside glowed softly in the window, steady as a lamp in a winter window, and it reminded him that kindness, quiet as it was, had finally found its way home. Still, he felt the moment hum through him, a simple truth settling. Where old doubt once lived, a man didn't need applause for service, only a place that understood it. And as the breeze rustled the lake and the Admiral bowed his head once more inside, Sam knew the town would remember who he'd always been. If this story moved you, share it forward.